Mila finds herself not only imprisoned by the King Alpha Roman, but also mysteriously marked by him. How will she escape this cyclic captivity and face the impending full moon? How will her relationship with Roman evolve, and can she find her way back home? Explore the secrets of the wolf moon. Subscribe to join the adventure. Chapter 13. The forest was a roar of sounds around me, wave after wave crashing through me as I stumbled through the path before me. My heart ached within me, demanding that I turn back the direction I came back to him. But the further I moved away, the more that crawling sensation, an unnatural deforming of my flesh simmered back into something familiar and safe. I wasn't sure how long I had ran for before my legs finally had slowed down, but within that time howls had only grown among the night in magnitude. At first, I hadn't noticed them, but now that my panic had begun to subside if only a tiny bit, I paused to listen to the symphony within the night. My senses were so much more amplified, more so than I could understand. I didn't know what I was anymore, but I knew I definitely wasn't human. Humans didn't grow claws and fangs like I had only moments before. Humans couldn't listen to the sound of animals crying into the night and understand the meaning behind them. Something had changed. There were howls of despair and also of utter joy, anger, and ecstasy. The wildlife within the trees responded, awakened, aware, and agitated by the change in the environment. I felt a sudden tug within me, a whisper of Roman beginning to step towards my direction, and I bolted in the opposite direction in reaction. I stepped over a collection of rocks and limbs, turned a corner, and stopped sharply. In the small clearing, a form stood looking at the full moon unmoving. Her blood-red hair made it easy for me to identify her, but the sight of tears in her eyes unnerved and silenced me. She turned at my presence, lifting her hand to wipe the tears away quickly. "I saw you at the bonfire," Kate stated quietly, obviously trying to cover any emotion she had been revealing when thought alone. "I thought tonight the crone would be taking you." I was struck by the idea that Kate was declaring the reason for her tears was for me. We barely knew each other. "I'm okay, I think." I tried to reassure her, looking down at my own hands uncertainly. I lifted my touch to my neck where Roman's mark had somehow healed into a rather sensitive scar than the previous raw wound from before. "Yes. I think I'm okay." Kate tilted her head in response to my dazed comment. "You sound as though you're in shock. Did you shift?" I shook my head quickly, looking down at my hands quickly as though they would form into claws at any moment once again. I felt that tug again, the one that reminded me that Roman was in this forest with me, and that he could no doubt feel me as clearly as I could feel him. I immediately responded by aiming to run away, but Kate abruptly blocked my path and gripped my upper arms curiously. "I'm okay, I think," I told her again. "You're panicking," Kate confirmed shortly. She lifted my hair from the mark on my neck briefly before nodding with understanding. "You marked him. You shifted, at least a little bit." "I'm not a wolf," I shook my head firmly, over and over and over. But then I added in whispers, "I'm not human. I'm not human." Kate abruptly pinched my arms roughly, making me yelp with sudden pain. I ripped myself from her grip and glared at her. "What's wrong with you?" I demanded in anger. "Nothing. I'm pretty much flawless," Kate teased, shrugging and suddenly at ease with herself. I stared at her with suspicion, recalling all the spooky things the wolves were saying about her before the match. I looked around briefly for her lance and found it leaning against a nearby tree. "Before the match, people were saying." I began slowly. Kate swiftly interrupted, "I wouldn't take any gossip here seriously, especially now that you'll be the Queen Luna. People like to talk." "Apparently not you," I continued, ignoring the Queen Luna comment pointedly, as the mere mention brought on a sudden wave of anxiety throughout me. "They said you were a mute. And that you gave up your voice to the goddesses in return for the lance. Laced in silver." I expected her to be shifty and hesitant, but Kate remained unmoved and at ease. Silver hurts lichens, Kate informed me easily, moving to her lance slowly before lifting it from its spot and twirling it carefully in her grip. Silver is an antiquity metal said to have come from the moon itself, created by the mother and given to mortals as a form of protection against any dangerous lichens that would wish to harm them. The King Alpha worked hard to ensure humans would forget about that weakness. How can you touch it then? If you're a lichen. I hesitated, recalling how I had lifted it myself during the match to win our fight. And how can I, if I'm? It's not really laced with silver, obviously. I just don't want anyone to touch my lance, Kate teased me lightly, reaching forward to rub my head fondly. She paused just after, pulling her hand away and frowning. I guess I shouldn't be so informal to the King Alpha's mate anymore. Appearances and all. Another wave of anxiety rushed through me, but it was halted by the sudden appearance of another lycanthrope, who rushed into the clearing with utter confusion written among his face. He looked from me to Kate, lifting his hands with submission. Something's happened. The mother's blessing has returned to us, the man said briefly. He seemed to be waiting for response, but I wasn't sure what he meant, and Kate had turned into stony silence in the presence of someone other than myself. The lichen apparently sensed this and began muttering to himself, the mother's blessing has returned. And he continued to wander through the forest in a daze. I looked from his receding presence to Kate with my own confusion. Is it normal for the forest to be so alive like this on a full moon? I asked her, listening to that symphony of the wild echoing throughout the trees. I hesitated a moment and then began to step towards the sounds of the wolves in the distance. Kate immediately held out her arm in front of me to block my path. If he spoke the truth, you don't want to go in that direction, Kate warned me carefully, lowering her arm to tighten her grip on her lance. You know what the mother's blessing is, right? Mates, I replied faintly, turning to look at her tense form. Why is that bad? It's been decades since the mother took away her blessing. Lichens have been wandering as humans do, searching for their soulmates themselves. Many have bonded in their own ways, hoping that deep down they are truly mates, Kate explained patiently, pausing to listen before continuing. Imagine it. You're with someone for 10 years. Then suddenly the mother's blessing comes and that person isn't your mate. Maybe someone else is. Maybe you have no mate in this pack, but the one you love has found theirs. It's a blessing, sure, but initially it can be a curse. If he spoke the truth, there will be a lot of confusion and anger before we can find the joy in it. I understood now why the symphony of the night was so confused. If the mother's blessing was back, the wolves were finally able to discern their mates. Some were joyous at finding each other without a doubt, but some would be losing someone they loved. Your alpha will be busy breaking up fights tonight. He will have to put his pack above you for now. You can relax, Kate informed me before turning to glance at me. I had widened my eyes in response, wondering how she knew I was feeling for his presence nearby. I was waiting to run if he was too close in case that unnatural urge to shift came over me again. We should hide out until the moon falls, just in case a stray pup decides to pick a fight with us. I felt with Kate's history, that would be a mistake on the other lichen's part than hers. Okay, I agreed hesitantly. I let Kate lead me further into the forest, away from the Trinity village and the howls that echoed through the darkness. She eventually stopped at a large tree, gesturing for me to climb it as I had done plenty of times before. When I reached high enough, she followed and soon we were both perched easily among the branches unseen by those below. I leaned against Kate's warm form on instinct, resting my eyes quietly and listening to the sounds of the night in the distance. I found myself reaching for Roman hesitantly, feeling his breath in his lungs and the strength in his limbs. His hot skin felt just under mine, flushing over me powerfully, and I knew in a pause of his step that he could feel me just the same. Within a span of a moment, he shifted like liquid from one form to another, his wolf towering and powerful. A howl ripped through him, reaching for the pack that was out of control around him, and lifting into the air so tremendously that it easily found me as well. I gasped, sitting up straight with widened eyes, and looked to Kate quickly, who had become more alert as well. Silence followed the call, the forest stunned into a quiet that I'd only ever heard before when I had demanded it of the wildlife myself. When nothing more happened, I relaxed cautiously in my spot again, listening to the peace that had finally fallen over the trees. I awoke shivering and alone. Overnight, the snow had blanketed the earth with silent precision, and with the sun rising over the horizon, the white of the scenery was nearly blinding. I looked around for Kate, but she wasn't nearby, and there was no evidence of when she had left among the snowfall. I dropped from the trees quietly, rubbing my arms for warmth and huffing to make clouds of breath in front of me with amusement. I looked around for tracks to follow Kate back to the village, but it was as though she had disappeared from existence overnight. I began to move in the direction I hoped would lead me somewhere useful. It wasn't as though I was in too much of a hurry to get back to the lichens, but the air was awfully cold around me and the chill was only growing deeper despite the light of the sun. I began to consider ideas of what I would do if I truly became lost when I felt a jolt within me. I twisted around sharply and took a step back. Roman stood not too far away, his form tall and intimidating as he peered at me hesitantly. My thoughts flashed to the delirious way in which I had willingly kissed him, and my eyes immediately glanced at his lips in response, just briefly before a flush of red flashed over my skin embarrassingly. "Why are you here?" I asked, as though this were my home and not some random place in the forest that I had wandered to. "I came to bring you back to the village," he stated quite obviously. "I can find my way back by myself," I responded firmly before turning away to continue on my path determinedly. I ignored the growing cold throughout me and the way Roman's presence tugged on my insides, demanding my attention. "You're going the wrong way," Roman finally told me. I paused and then turned with the intention of declaring my flawless directional skill. My response was silenced when I realized just how close he had been following me, his body just inches away from me. I looked from his chest up to his face, momentarily startled. Roman only stood solidly, tilting his head as he looked at me. "I was taking the scenic route," I answered half-heartedly. "You're cold and hungry. I don't like the discomfort. Follow me. I have some ground rules we need to discuss." His features had shifted into one of familiar coldness, a distrust that I was beginning to recognize was his way of proceeding forward despite the demands of the goddesses. "Ground rules." I narrowed my eyes with my own suspicion. "I've allowed you to mark me. We are now linked. However, I refuse to allow you the title of Queen Luna, being that you're barely a lichen as is. And I won't allow you to run around doing as you please. It'll be a distraction every time I have to wake up to the feel of your self-destructing decisions," he abruptly announced, tensing immediately for my reaction, as though I might try to attack him as I'd clearly done before. "You won't allow me to do anything because I don't need your approval to do as I please." I tried to control the growing anger that was warming my body despite the cold around us. Roman stepped forward, lifting his hands to wrap around my arms easily. I gasped at the fire in his touch, any shivering felt before fading away almost immediately. "You feel this?" Roman demanded more than questioned. He moved closer, lowering his face over mine dangerously so that his scent and power seemed to flow over and through me. I was stunned by the heat of it, lifting my own face most agreeably as though enthralled by him. "You're my mate. But you are also my prisoner," Roman growled firmly against me. "You are an oracle and you are of the humans. You are not an equal nor are you fit to be Luna, much less a member of my pack. If it weren't for the cursed goddesses, you would be dead or banished by now. You will learn to obey me, or I will make your life much more uncomfortable than you can imagine." I ripped myself from him just as abruptly, gasping from his touch with surprise. I thought about the Roman who had kept me in his room for the past month, angry but also not at me. I thought of him saving me from a horrible death only last night. This Roman was not as appealing. He was cruel and horribly mistaken if he thought I would be intimidated by the feelings the mate Mark forced on me. Go ahead, make my life uncomfortable. An injury to me is an injury to you, right? It would make me the happiest person in the world to know you are suffering, even if I am, too. I mustered every ounce of venom into my words dangerously, just so they would land home with great satisfaction. Roman stepped towards me sharply and I turned to escape, but was far too slow. His arm suddenly snaked around my waist and I was lifted from the ground. I screeched loudly and began hitting Roman's arm and kicking him violently. Roman! Roman, let me go! I cried out angrily. Stop throwing a fit like a child and I might, he answered simply. I stopped struggling momentarily, waiting just as he took another step, and twisted my foot around his. The effect was immediate. Roman stumbled and I struck with my elbow to attempt to hit his face. We both fell to the ground, the landing rather rough. Roman was above me, his torso half over me as though he had to catch himself from crushing me entirely. I paused only a moment and began to twist away in order to make a run for it. I'm leaving, Roman suddenly said to me with frustration, making me stop in my attempt with confusion. I rolled onto my back, facing him with a frown. What do you mean? I mean what I said. I'm leaving. I wanted to go over the ground rules in a more suitable place, but you've made it clear you prefer the wilder things. He huffed and shifted above me as though to get more comfortable. I was stuck on the initial statement, wondering what exactly that meant if he was leaving. Am I leaving, too? I asked with a deepening frown. I didn't like the idea of going further away from my home village without any idea on which direction to go if I could escape back to them. Roman watched me for a moment without any hint to his thoughts. You will stay here. I'm sure you heard last night. The mother's blessing has returned. I must travel to the other packs and ensure your goddesses haven't caused complete chaos. And to make sure the packs will. He paused, almost having said something more than he intended. I lifted myself up on my elbows, my suspicion overriding my need to remain far away from him. Will what? Continue not to worship your goddesses. Afraid they may end up having second thoughts now that they are given their mates. Afraid they might make the connection that the only reason they are not in the goddesses' graces is because of you. A deep anger ripped through Roman so quickly that I found myself flattened to the ground breathlessly by it. You think you know everything, Mila, Roman growled, lowering himself intimidatingly. What could I have possibly done that would require a death sentence on all of the lycanthrope kind? I just did to the humans what they wanted to do to us. I refused to be locked in a coffin underground. And I banished a bunch of useless oracles. The rest of the packs followed the foolish goddesses up until their curse fell on us. Only then did they turn away. What came first, Roman? The curse? Or your world-ending plan for the humans? I whispered the last part almost fearfully, afraid of that anger heating within him uncontrollably. I was frozen underneath him, but I continued to glare at him steelly, tensing under the heat of his rising rage. It doesn't matter now, does it? You should have begged me to let you die. Now you'll be lucky enough to see what will happen to the humans, including your pathetic family, Roman growled furiously. I widened my eyes with the mention of my family, a fear entering my soul at the realization that despite everything it was very clear that whatever doom Cynthia had warned me of was still coming, and it would take my family with it. Roman punched the ground beside me with sudden frustration, pushing himself away from me and disappearing with seething anger. Chapter 14. The ground rules went as follows. While Roman was gone, I was under the care of Beta Caleb, who was the acting alpha until Roman returned. I was to listen to every demand given to me by Beta Caleb. I was to live under the same house as Beta Caleb. I was not allowed to be out of sight of Beta Caleb. If Beta Caleb saw fit, I was to be locked up accordingly. While Roman was gone, I was not to talk about the fact that I was his mate to anyone in the pack. I was not to demand submission from anyone in his pack. I was not the Luna, the Queen Luna, nor a member of said pack. Therefore, I was not to participate in any pack activity, including matches. While Roman was gone, I was not to participate in any oracle nonsense, or any nonsense to do with the goddesses in general. This included any witchy water stuff, visions, and temples. I was also not to mention any of said nonsense to anyone. While Roman was gone, I was not allowed to be touched by anyone. This included in any nefarious or tender way. I was not to be harmed or loved in either measure. After all, I was his mate. This meant no other wolf or human was allowed to find comfort in my arms. And this meant no other was allowed to try to kill me, besides Roman himself, of course. Were the rules clear? Yes. Was I going to abide by them? Probably not. I sat in the general living room of Beta Caleb's house, my arms and legs crossed defensively, as I glared at my environment with displeasure. I had been in this house before with Diana, the nurse wolf with a knack for archery. However, she hadn't appeared since Roman left me here, so I was stuck glaring at the form of Beta Caleb, who merely played with a blade absently. "You can stop looking at me like that at any time now," Caleb said absently to me, a tone of warning behind his words. I only uncrossed my legs, crossed them again, and narrowed my eyes further as I glared at him. "The last time I saw you, you locked me in an abandoned temple," I accused him with obvious distaste. Caleb shrugged half-heartedly, lifting his head to sniff the air silently. "You got out, didn't you? And you left a bloody mess in my bathroom." "I assumed we were even," he replied with a smirk. "I could smell you all over the place." Then again, Diana always had a thing for bringing home strays. I continued to glare at him in anger. "Is it still called straying if you're kidnapped and nearly murdered? I didn't pick you out from that village. And I already told you I didn't hunt you either." "You're angry at the wrong wolf, girl," Caleb stated in a sing-song tone. "I'll remember that when I'm dreaming about you attacking my crying family members for trying to save me," I snapped back at him. "Roman is gone now. You can just let me go do whatever. It's not like I even have the slightest idea of which direction my village is in anyway." Caleb paused and leaned forward slightly, peering at me carefully. His dark blue eyes were unnerving if only for a moment while he inspected me. Then he leaned back with a look of satisfaction. "First of all, it would be suicide to even consider disobeying the King Alpha. Secondly, I have absolutely no doubt that you know which direction your village is in," Caleb announced easily, twirling the blade in his grip with amusement. "I was an idiot to let you keep that blade for the hunt. I had no idea you'd actually know how to use it. Even though I knew you weren't the typical human girl who shows up to a selection covered in blood. It's like seasoning yourself for us. I thought it might intimidate you," I muttered sarcastically. "You were shaking like a leaf." "Intimidating," Caleb laughed briefly. The front door opened, interrupting a conversation that was only growing to irritate me. A woman who was undeniably Diana entered with ease. She turned to greet Caleb, and paused before a word came out when spotting me. Her eyes moved from my defensive and angry form to Caleb's relaxed form to the blade in his hand. "Goddess, Caleb. Put that thing away, please," Diana scolded him with a huff of breath. Caleb rolled his eyes, but did as she asked and sheathed the blade at last. She then walked towards me, bending down to give me a rather warm hug. I blinked in surprise. "When did you get here?" "I'm Beta Caleb's prisoner until Alpha Roman comes back," I sneered with irritation. "Prisoner? That's ridiculous." "You can be our guest," Diana answered with confidence. "Diana, you can't just," Caleb began with a tone of exasperation. "Come now, love. We can still do as we are ordered without being cruel. This is our alpha's mate after all. She's pretty much our Luna at this point. And we've never had a Luna before. It's exciting, isn't it? Diana seemed just that excited. She turned to look at Caleb, who looked awkwardly in response. Yeah, he's refusing that title to her. And also a position in the pack, Caleb told her simply. Diana hesitated, looking from Caleb back to me. Well, that doesn't make any sense. He let her mark him, right? He let you mark him. She was addressing me now at this point. I took a note from Caleb's book and shrugged apathetically. Diana moved closer to me, tilting my head to the side to look at the healed mark on my shoulder. Yes, the mark is completed. Diana, just drop it, Caleb pleaded with her pointedly. I just don't understand. I thought this meant things would change. That we could. Caleb cleared his throat dangerously, staring down Diana with a suddenly tense form. Diana hesitated, obviously torn between just throwing caution to the wind and keeping things hidden. She finally decided, turning back to me with a smile. Oh well, you're alive at least. Are you hungry, Mila? I was torn between distrust and hunger. My hunger won easily when I found myself nodding before I realized it. Diana took the chance to dance her way into the kitchen with satisfaction. I suspected she'd already learned food was the best way to my heart based on the last visit I had with her. I stood to follow her and Caleb stood just as quickly to block my path. I honestly didn't think there could be another man as annoying as Roman, I told him with irritation. Diana cleared her throat from the other room and Caleb glanced back momentarily before stepping aside and holding his arm for me to step by. I walked towards where Diana was preparing me something to eat with Caleb close behind. I sat down at the counter, glaring at Caleb when he sat nearest to me, and turned to Diana. So are you two like a couple or something? I asked, causing a knowing look to exchange between the two of them. Diana dropped a plate in front of me and smiled sweetly. We have been for a while now. After the snow moon, when the mother's blessing came back to us, we thankfully were made aware of our mate status, Diana explained to me, shifting her curls to reveal the healed mark of a bite on her own shoulder. A blush appeared over her skin at revelation, but for some reason a sense of relief came over me. A part of me was drawn to Diana, in the same way I was drawn to Kate or Cynthia. They were kind to me for no reason, so I wished happiness on them despite their status as a werewolf. I made no further comment on the mate subject, instead digging into the food presented to me with a sense of joy. I was looking at Diana from the corner of my eye, thinking about Kate as well. You know, I heard that you came here with Kate from a pack of rogues, I finally said carefully, noticing Caleb shift uncomfortably next to me. I turned to glance at him, wondering why the statement would bother him. I'm just wondering what you know about her. About Kate? Diana verified curiously. Yeah. I like her, I mentioned simply. Well, that's a first, Caleb scoffed with disbelief. Caleb, Diana scolded him teasingly. What? She hates Alpha Roman, but likes the mute. Naturally, he shrugged with amusement. So she's a mute. I tried to steer the conversation the direction I wanted it. I've never heard her say a word. I met her a year or so before I ended up joining the Trinity Pack with her. She just kind of wandered in from nowhere, and was pretty helpful with the rogues, despite her scary demeanor. She had a lot of hunting and fighting skill, so it was safer with her around. When we first arrived here, Alpha Roman demanded her to pledge herself to him and well, you know you can't reject the King Alpha's direct command, but she didn't say a word. Just bowed. Only a true mute would be able to manage that, Diana explained. I had stopped eating and was only listening to her explanation with confusion. I could imagine Kate kneeling in front of Roman, pledging herself silently despite being told through his all-consuming command to voice it. I heard you fought the shadow of death in a match before Alpha Roman interrupted. Caleb addressed me, quite interested suddenly. I frowned at him pointedly, making it clear I didn't want to speak to him rather than Diana, but something in his comment irritated my competitive side. I did. And I won. I muttered bitterly. You should take her with you to the hunting grounds, Diana suggested to Caleb eagerly. Absolutely not, Caleb responded just as quickly. Alpha Roman said she can't fight or participate in any pack activities. That includes matches, hunting grounds, food halls, bonfires, any of the runs. No eating. No sleeping. No breathing. I began to mock him with irritation. She's not allowed near the temples or bodies of water. She's not allowed to talk about the goddesses or the mate bond. Caleb continued to ignore me. No smiling. No twirling. No blinking. No speaking. I wish that last one was true, he said to me sharply. Well, you're stuck with me, so whatever I can't do, you can't either, I told him triumphantly. I can lock you up in a dungeon while I go do those other things. My mouth dropped open with disbelief. I quickly closed it and glared at him. Yeah, throw me in more cages. It's an ongoing theme on your part. I'm starting to wish I had hunted you after all. We can fight right now if you want. I stood sharply. Caleb stared me down intensely. Diana looked as though she had completely lost control of the entire situation. I only kept Caleb's gaze intently, prepared to lunge myself entirely at this werewolf even without any ammo. If I could go against the King Alpha and the shadow of death and survive, I felt I had one up on this man. You are definitely Alpha Roman's mate, Caleb finally said. I can see it now. Come on. He stood in front of me and bowed slightly, lifting his hand palm up in front of me. I wasn't sure what the motion meant, so I only stared at him dumbfounded. I am offering you acceptance and a form of submission. I will not admit you as my superior until I have been bested, but I will admit you as an equal. Let's try to be friends, shall we, Tala Mila? Caleb said to me simply. I hesitated further, recalling how hands had brushed over mine before the fight with Kate. Going on instinct, I reached forward and brushed my fingertips over Caleb's palm, and he straightened up in ease. Fingertips are rude, especially for a tutelary title to do to a beater, but I'll accept it as a rookie's mistake, he informed me, turning to gesture to Diana. Diana failed to hunt you as well. She's only ever preferred the bow to the bite. Diana looked entirely pleased. She smiled and held her hand out to me, palms up. I took the hint much better this time, and I used the entirety of my own palm to brush against hers. It felt silly, but a part of me could feel the scent of her hand on mine, like a different type of mark. For the wolves who submitted to you during the hunt, you won't need their acceptance in such a form, because they've already given it to you by force. In this way, we aren't demanding a challenge. It's a lot more relaxing, unless you were to deny it, Diana explained to me, probably recognizing the confusion written on my face. You are our guest, until Alpha Roman comes back. But please don't abuse such a title. Any failures on Beta Caleb's part will be punished upon his return, and it could be brutal, especially when coming to a famed mate. I paused, considering her request in earnest. For Roman, I definitely would do everything in my power to go against him. But for someone like Diana, who had done nothing to harm me, I couldn't find it in myself to let her down. Fine. A willing guest. I'll do as you ask, I submitted, turning to peer at Caleb determinedly. I guess it would be better to have friends, rather than more enemies. I went a few days before I began to feel that nagging sensation within me. It kept me up at night, and I found myself hugging my knees to my chest, listening to that beast under my skin. Most of the time, it felt like something wild and dangerous, unnatural. But sometimes it felt different, like the softest kiss of a rabbit's nose when it greets you. Whatever it was very clear on what it wanted more than anything else. I thought about Roman. I thought about his unsavory threats on me and my family's life. A feeling of displeasure associated with the thought of him, but behind that was the beast within me that very much enjoyed every time he had touched me. I absently reached for him, searching for him through the trees of the forest, bending with the river, under the light of the moon, until something in the mark that connected us allowed me to feel his flesh as mine if only for a moment. And a short moment it was. Roman immediately rejected the connection, cutting off my reach just after I had touched him. I lied back in bed with irritation, both at Roman and myself. After a moment longer, I thought about my family. I recalled sitting between my mother's legs as she ran her fingers through my hair soothingly, watching my dad show my little brother how a certain work tool was used. I wondered if they had prayed over my death, wishing it to be swift and painless. I wondered if my mother had stopped crying over my absence, or if my brother had accepted the fact that I couldn't have survived after all. I felt guilt that I hadn't somehow let them know I was alive, if not escaped to return to them by now. When I rolled over onto my side, I looked at my hand, which reflected the light of the night softly before me. I thought about how it had shifted into something half animal before my own eyes. Would the thing I'd become even be welcomed back in my village? Would it not frighten those who thought they knew me? I closed my eyes, thinking over Cynthia's warning. Even if I did go back to them, Roman was planning something awful. The goddesses thought I could stop it, though I wasn't sure why. I obviously wasn't making a difference. Being Beta Caleb's guest was a lot less dull than being Roman's prisoner. For the first week or so, he was quite strict on following all the rules laid out by his alpha, but after a couple days of prodding from Diana, he began to relax more when it came to me. He allowed me to follow him around the village, to begin meeting members of the pack. The youngest member of the pack was a girl just a few months older than I was. Her name was Deb, and she enjoyed plants, growing them and learning about all the different types and their properties. She apologized to me for trying to kill me in the hunt, though she apparently was nowhere close to being the one to catch me. Not too far outside the village was a vast farmland and crops, which were withered under the snow. Some of the pack kept over the collected crops, keeping them healthy and distributing them with ease. Most of them seemed interested in my presence, but a look from their beater kept them from addressing me too informally. Besides the farming, there were groups of hunters who would gather what they could from the wildlife around them. There were collectors and traders, who moved from wolf pack to wolf pack freely. Communication was open between them. Besides some obvious differences in freedom, I found myself struck by how similar the people of this deity village were to my own. On one random day, Caleb took me to the arena, in which I had fought Roman in during our challenge. Some straggler wolves were watching from the safety of the seats and stands surrounding the place, but within the center there were at least a dozen men and women sparring with each other. Most were in human form, but some had shifted at least partially. Many also were using weapons, and none were actually intent on killing each other. "This group is my responsibility," Caleb told me with a critical look. "They are our top performers, our strongest warriors. I believe your friend Kate is the least friendly-looking one over there." He pointed out Kate to me, and I saw what he meant. She stood in front of her sparring partner without a weapon, but something in her serious expression was weapon enough as is. When her partner finally lunged at her, she moved faster than I could see and had him pinned to the ground with his arm twisted behind his back easily. I was beginning to suspect she let me win in the match against her. "Why do you need warriors?" I asked, trying to sound aloof, but obviously failing when I saw the look Caleb shot me. "For wars," he answered simply. "Against other wolves." I turned my gaze to his form slowly. My village didn't train our people to fight. We weren't even supposed to hunt more than what was in our designated area, and that meant mostly fishing. How many times had I risked my life by searching for food further than I was supposed to? Logan, Caleb called out, ignoring my line of question easily. The man being demolished by Kate grunted and Kate released him before pausing when seeing me. A short tilt of her head was all she gave me before walking further away into the arena and out of my sight. The man, Logan, approached Caleb and stopped when peering at me. He narrowed his eyes momentarily, something about my presence bothering him, and then he bowed almost comically low, revealing his neck to me briefly. Tala, Logan greeted me gruffly. It's Mila, I responded quietly. Logan was reportedly one of the first to be forced to submit to you, Caleb told me, something in his tone indicating that this was something of an embarrassing fact for Logan. I hesitated, taking a moment to look at the man further. He was dangerously tall, with dark red hair. Despite the usual pale that came with gingers, he was deeply tanned as though he lived in the sunlight. And his eyes were a light brown that narrowed when meeting mine. I was also the one who would have won the hunt, Logan stated determinedly. I recalled the heat of the wolf's breath on the back of my neck, just mere inches away from ending my life before my power had held them all at bay. A chill went through me despite my best attempts to appear confident. I want you to watch over Mila for a while. I'll be nearby, Caleb ordered Logan briefly, pawning me off on one of his warriors without hesitation. I immediately felt discomfort at the idea, especially in the responding look on Logan's face, but Caleb didn't wait for approval from either of us before he was off speaking to the others without me. I narrowed my eyes at Logan suspiciously. You aren't even going to apologize for trying to kill me? I finally asked him accusingly. So far, he had been the only unapologetic wolf I'd come across. He turned his head to the side to look at me emotionlessly. You killed one of my friend's cousin. She was pregnant with a pup nearly 2 decades ago, when the maiden took away her blessing. She was one of many who lost their child in their own bellies. You killed one of ours. I tried to kill you. I find we are mostly even, he responded simply. Did you ever apologize for taking that life? I was staring at him openly, remembering the feeling of horror and utter disgust when that wolf had shifted back into a human with my blade embedded in her skull. Back then, she had been some unknown beast among many with supernatural abilities, and my life had been on the line. I didn't like to think of it, even now. So I kept quiet. Do you want to spar a bit? Logan ignored his previous question with ease. I'm not allowed to fight apparently, I answered quietly. Light sparring, then. I saw your fight with the King Alpha. You have a natural talent, but you lack the information needed when fighting against those of our kind, he suggested, which confused me. I thought you didn't like me, I hesitated. Logan half shrugged, glancing at me once again. I don't like to be bested. Especially by little girls. He huffed with damaged pride and then gestured for me to follow him. I frowned and paused, uncertain if this was the best route to go by, but without Caleb paying attention, and without Roman around to interrupt, it seemed a more fun route than just staring and listening all day. Logan's light sparring was not light by definition, however, he did manage not to harm me much when knocking me to the ground. He was also a pretty decent instructor, constantly pointing out weaknesses that I should aim for and strengths I should fall back on when going against someone obviously more powerful than myself. I know I shouldn't even have to say it, but in a fight you should utilize your command that blessing the mother gave you during the hunt. It may seem unfair, but in most cases it would probably be the only way you win, Logan instructed me gruffly before pausing, but you do smell of wolf and of the King Alpha. I'm assuming you must have shifted by now. I pushed myself from the ground with a grunt. I corrected Logan and telling him the mother didn't give me that so-called blessing during the hunt, but something told me it would be too much of a hassle to argue over. As for his question, I considered the answer and hesitated. I guess, a little bit, I answered uncertainly. Many wolves will shift during a fight. We are stronger in our beast forms. It gives us more focus. Sometimes you can shift only part of yourself, if only to focus the strength in a specific way, but that takes great concentration, and even greater skill. In either case, to aim for the kill you want to go for the brain, as you know, or the heart. Logan placed a fist on his chest above his own heart. Stab it. Remove it. Destroy it. It's an instant win. If you try to just win by submission, or by knocking the other unconscious, it's much more risky on your part. Logan lifted his hands, waving me to come after him. I did so, feeling a bit silly but determined, and promptly was knocked to the ground again. You would also want to take your fighter by surprise. You're weak like a human. Slow. A wolf would no doubt make a game out of you. Until you learn to shift, your only advantage would probably be to just act weaker and slower, to make them lower their guard, Logan instructed firmly. I pushed myself up and lunged at him. I was abruptly yanked away in mid-attack by a rather irritated Caleb. I said watch, not fight, Caleb scolded both of us. He wasn't hurting me, I answered with disappointment. Let me go, I want to play with him. Yes, Beta Caleb, let me play with the little rabbit, Logan added, something in his tone making him sound like a cat playing with a mouse before eating it. Caleb began to pull me away from the arena without a response, but I threw Logan a wave goodbye with hope that I would be able to learn more from him in the future. Okay, I groaned at Caleb before he finally released me. You must be careful around the pack members, especially the ones you made submit. If he found you unworthy, Logan could find reason to challenge you again, and the next time, he would not give you a chance to use any blessing against him, Caleb warned me sternly. Wouldn't that be suicide? Roman wouldn't like that, I mean. The King Alpha isn't here right now. That's why there will be no fighting, Caleb said sharply, plus, you obviously aren't above challenging a person yourself. And if you challenge someone, there's nothing the Alpha could. Caleb hesitated and stopped speaking entirely. If they could, my ears would have perked up with interest. Oh really? I asked slowly. I should have locked you up, Caleb muttered unhappily. He's going to kill me when he gets back. I might as well start digging my grave. Make a tombstone. Can I speak at your funeral? I teased with amusement before adding sincerely, I don't intend to challenge anyone ever again if I can help it. Your secret it's safe with me. Caleb peered at me momentarily, as though to deduce if I would keep my word or not, but then seemed satisfied. As for myself, I knew any real fights with wolves would no doubt lead to my own death. It was not appealing to me. What was appealing to me was learning about them. I didn't intend to challenge anyone, but I did intend to get Logan as an instructor in the near future, no matter how much time it would take to bug Caleb into agreeing to it. For once, my future didn't look so bleak. Chapter 15. Artemis, Huntress of the Moon, make my aim true. Make my aim true. Make my aim true. A whisper was echoing through my mind, something barely heard among the noise of my own thoughts trailing through my dreams. Give me goals to seek and the constant determination to achieve them. Grant me communion with nature. Allow me to live surrounded by plants and animals that I can grow, protect, and nurture. Grow. Protect. Nurture. 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 My breath hitched in my slumber, and I twisted under the sheets with discomfort. Allow me the strength and wisdom to be my own mistress, not defined by the expectations of others. And sustain my sexuality to be as yours, wild and free as nature itself. Wild and free. Wild. Free. I sat up sharply, my eyes wide with momentary confusion. It took me a second to take in my surroundings, and to recall the guest room I'd been resting in for over a month since Roman had been gone. The night was dark outside the window, but it wasn't quiet. At least not to me. I could hear the hum of something powerful through the air, whispering words I could no longer understand, and it called to me in a way I hadn't felt before. I flung the sheets from my legs and carefully made my way to the door, opening it easily before stepping out of the room entirely. I didn't look for Caleb or Diana, instead focused entirely on the eerie call that sang to me like a siren in the night. I wasn't sure if the front door was unlocked or if I had unlocked it in my daze. Either way, I was suddenly outside in the cool April air. Without knowing where it would lead me, I followed the call to the nearby woods, stepping with ease through the trees. My fingers brushed against a tree, causing me to pause momentarily as I looked at it curiously. The rough edges of the bark felt vivid, reminding me despite the strange sensations that this wasn't a dream. I didn't have to walk too far. Before long, I was coming across a familiar space, a lake in the trees with a clear surface that reflected the sky above it flawlessly. I had nearly died by this lake. I had marked Roman by this lake. And now I had been called to it again. I wasn't alone. In front of the lake, there were 5 women of the Trinity pack, dancing under the stars. 3 of them held a lit torch in their hands, lifting it to the sky as they twirled between the other 2, before passing them with an ease hard to understand. A red symbol marked each of their foreheads, flashing in the night black 1 second, and red along the light of the torches the next. Words were being whispered among each of them, over and over again, as though they were pleaded with life itself. It took me a moment to realize that I recognized at least one of the women in the group. Diana passed her torch to the next wolf and swiftly turned to spot me. I thought I would run, but instead I stared wide-eyed curiously. She stepped towards me and lifted her hand to me welcomingly. I hesitated, but then moved to take her hand with wonder. She pulled me towards the other wolves, who folded me into their circle as easily as breathing. I wanted to ask what was going on, but something in the siren song was striking me dumbfounded. I only stood as one wolf traced her fingertip over my forehead slowly, drawing that symbol I had seen before in their abandoned temple. It's the symbol of the triple goddesses. I instantly knew this was something I was not supposed to be doing. Roman would be furious to know any of his wolves were drawing symbols of the goddesses on their forehead and dancing for them under the stars. And at the same time, this made me much more eager to participate in this strange situation. I fell into the dance with a familiar ease, as though I had done it before. And while I had done dances before, I hadn't done one such as this one. I lifted my hand when a torch was held out to me, taking it carefully and staring at the flame with wonder before continuing to twirl around the other wolves curiously. 3 torches, 1 for each goddess. Artemis, huntress of the moon, I heard the whispers around me, and for some reason I knew the words as well, make my aim true. Diana had stopped twirling and was instead in the center of the circle, first on her knees and then on her back. One woman took the torch from me and they all 3 were staked into the ground around Diana carefully. I continued to follow the lead of the other wolves, twisting around Diana, lifting my hands up to the waxing crescent moon and closing my eyes. Maiden of freedom, you are the eternal virgin, the holy bride of nature, and the revealing light within the shadows. Through you, all that is good comes to birth, Diana called out, her words like static electricity throughout my limbs. There was power in them, something I couldn't explain, and when the women around me began to repeat Diana's words, I followed in suit. Mother of compassion, forever fertile, Lady of the Forge, you are the creating force of love and the strength which nourishes all that lives. Through you, the cause of life is served, Diana continued almost desperately. The women began to repeat the words, but my voice trailed into quiet whispers, and my steps slowed until I was no longer moving. Instead, I found myself staring at Diana's form on the forest floor. Crone of wisdom, ancient one, keeper of the cauldron, you stand at the gates between the worlds and carry the shining sickle of death. Without you, nothing can be transformed. Diana's words echoed around us as the women repeated them, their movements speeding up as they twisted around us determinedly. I lowered myself to my knees next to Diana, my actions of no concern to the wolves around us. Light of the goddesses, by the power and will of she that is three, Diana pleaded as I lifted my hand to her curiously. The power crawling under her skin called to me, asking me to feel it and feed it. I rested my hand on her stomach just as she continued, "Blessed be." The prayers grew louder around us, a question being sent to the goddesses above and begging to be answered. I knew what it was they asked, and a part of me wanted it for them, for Diana, as well. I'd heard of stranger rituals, asking for fertility in women who had no hope. I couldn't hear the wolves around me repeating the prayer around me. I could only feel the shift of the power under the palm of my hand, pulsing throughout Diana. Just as suddenly as I felt it through her, it sparked under my palm and then throughout me like lightning. The torches around us blew out in unison. I gasped and immediately tried to pull my hand away, but Diana grasped my wrist just as quickly. "Don't be afraid," she told me gently, but it was easier requested than done. But just as quickly as I had felt the power, it was suddenly gone. The wolves around us collapsed as well, panting in the darkness. It seemed like they were really listening that time, one of the younger women panted hopefully. I wasn't focused on the other wolves. Instead, I watched Diana, who sat up to peer at me curiously just the same. I looked at this lycan, a woman I thought was a normal lycan, but for some reason she felt like something else entirely. "Let's go home," Diana said, standing before holding her hand out to me once more. I took it, but something still nagged at me inside. That hadn't been a regular prayer. And I hadn't felt power like that before. In the week that followed the incident in the woods, things were normal. Diana didn't speak further on the strange ritual under the stars, and I was smart enough to know I shouldn't mention it in case we were overheard. The only indication I received were from the women who had been in the woods with us, who would greet me much more warmly than before, as though we were some form of family now. I continued to follow Caleb around for the most part, though I found it easier to interact with the pack without the curiosity and suspicion that they held from before. Sometimes I would help with tasks, some familiar to me such as laundry, dishes, making food, and cleaning. Other tasks I was less familiar with, though the only time I was approached with those was when I was around Logan. Something about Logan made us click almost instantly. I was completely certain that he intended to gain back the upper hand that he had lost during the hunt at some point in time, and in that fact I should be more careful around him, but he knew just what kept me interested. Every chance I could grasp, I would use to slip away and to find Logan, something I was very good at doing. On one particular day, while Caleb was distracted with an issue among the rations, I twisted out of sight and easily began to sprint away. I could sense the shapeshifters around me, but I found I could also track down specific ones if I wished to. I used this sense to hunt Logan, slipping between the buildings until I could sense his presence nearby. Logan wasn't alone. He was training with the other warriors, practicing for a war that I wasn't allowed to know about. I remained hidden out of sight for a while, watching as he sparred with one of the other warrior wolves intensely. This went on for a while until Logan suddenly had his opponent pinned, a claw to their throat dangerously. A tap on his arm in surrender and he released the wolf promptly, allowing them to take a break. Their ability was still far from my reach, but it didn't keep me from trying. I grasped at the blade in my hand, a present Logan had gifted me with after having lost my previous one to Roman. With Logan's back to me, his eyes on his receding previous opponent, I suddenly attacked. I ran across the space between us, ignoring the knowing looks of the other warriors who had already saw me coming, and lunged at Logan. Without looking, Logan swung his arm back and blocked mine roughly. I winced, but didn't falter. My blade was in my other hand. Having used my initial attack as a decoy, I swung the blade at Logan's side. He quickly leapt back, just barely missing the tip of my knife. Then he grasped the arm he had blocked, twisting me around and swiping his leg under mine until I found myself slammed into the ground onto my back solidly. I immediately lunged for the blade that had fallen from my grasp, but Logan kicked it away just as quickly before grasping my wrists and pinning my arms to my chest. He lifted a partially shifted hand threateningly, aiming to strike my throat. "Dead," Logan stated dangerously. "Oh man," I groaned and then squirmed in his grip in an attempt to escape his strong claws. When this failed, I sighed and then glared with determination. "I demand a rematch." "You always do," Logan responded with amusement before releasing me promptly. I moved to attack him, and he shoved me back down to the ground. Then he sat down in front of me. I frowned, less happy with this form of practice than the sparring matches I preferred. "Come on, hands up. You know the drill." Logan tapped his legs and then lifted his hands palm up. "Do we have to do this part?" I pouted unhappily. "Until you stop being afraid of it, yes," he responded with a shrug. I hesitated, but then lifted my hands until they hovered over his. Logan watched my hands intensely, hiding any thought he would have behind that stony expression. I knew already he was intrigued by my backwards nature. With much pressure from Logan, I could partially shift parts of my body, my hands, feet, and teeth. It was a skill most wolves had to spend years into their full shifts to conquer, but it was the full shift that I found I couldn't do myself. I still couldn't explain what I was, how I could shift any part of me at all, and why I wouldn't be able to shift entirely if I wasn't human at all. I clenched my teeth together as I reached for that wild power under the surface of my skin. It reacted to Logan's own beast not far from my grip, sensing something powerful and dangerous. My power was defensive when called on. It twisted my grip until claws began forming on the tips of my fingers instead, and my teeth lengthened with dangerous fangs. "You're getting better at it," Logan praised me, slowly lowering his hands away from me before pausing. I struggled to keep the form, but just the minor distance between us was enough to begin receding those dangerous claws back into my natural human form. He made a noise of disappointment. "You're too eager to shift back. You need to learn to hold it without my help." "I know," I grumbled, pulling my hands back into my lap and rubbing them together with discomfort. It still felt unnatural to me, but the power in the shift was both intoxicating and frightening to me. With a look from Logan, I rolled my eyes and lifted my hands again to practice the partial shift further. When you have control over the shift, you'll have a weapon much more useful than any blade or bow. Should you find yourself fighting a wolf, you'll want something reliable as this. You're small, slow, and weak. Disarming you would be easy, Logan lectured me as I attempted to hold the partial shift every time he moved his hands away, before failing and returning back to human form. I didn't like to be called small, slow, or weak. I narrowed my eyes at him. "What are you doing after this?" I asked Logan, pointedly ignoring my urge to respond to his provokes. Logan paused and then lifted his hands until his palms were resting against mine. I blinked in mild surprise, feeling the pulse of power under his skin against mine. "A few of us are going to the hunting grounds to gather some provisions. It's a good way to let off some steam, so I volunteered as well," Logan stated, tilting his head as he watched my reaction. The thought of hunting intrigued me. The thought of hunting with the wolves seemed like something I shouldn't do, and something I had been forbidden to do. But the way Logan watched me said he knew my desires before I did. "Can I go?" I finally asked despite myself. Logan smiled deviously. "If you can hold your shift for 30 seconds, you can go," he told me, much to my dismay. I took a deep breath and frowned in concentration as I looked at my human hands. I reached for that power again, forming those unnatural claws and pulling at the beast under Logan's skin, which still remained against mine. He waited a moment and then pulled his grip away, taking that power with it. I felt my form falter, but I really wanted to go to this hunt. I pushed at the power, demanding that it remain even if the danger wasn't as close as before. I recognized the difference. I was usually relieved to go back to my normal form, but if it was a desire to remain changed, it was easier to hold the partial shift. I knew you could do it. Logan reached forward to poke my nose, causing me to lose my focus for a moment. My hands reverted back to normal as I blinked at him. Come on then. We should probably go before Beta Caleb finds you again. I followed Logan across the grounds eagerly while simultaneously keeping an eye out for Caleb, who would no doubt be looking for me by this time. I usually couldn't get away with more than an hour with Logan before he would show up to scold me, though something told me Caleb was allowing it more than being outsmarted by the likes of me. When we arrived at the edge of the woods, there was already a small group of wolves waiting. A couple of them were in full shift, stepping carefully around the group impatient to start. The few that remained in human form greeted Logan expectantly before pausing when spotting me. She isn't allowed to go, is she? One man questioned Logan uncertainly. Of course not, she can't even shift, another interrupted before reaching to shove me away. Logan snatched his wrist and glowered at the man, the intensity in his silent threat enough to cause the wolf to back up. I myself was a bit surprised. It had been a while since anyone in the pack tried to do anything to me besides look away or bare necks. Tala here is with me. Let's just go as usual. Logan released the man and gestured for them to move away. Then he turned to me with a knowing look in response to my own expression. That's Vio. He's one of the wolves who wasn't in the range to submit to you. Probably doesn't enjoy the idea of a previous human being around here. He's not the only one, I grumbled unhappily. The small pack of wolves began to enter the trees, each one either already shifted or beginning to. I hesitated, watching them land on all fours before lunging into the forest easily. Logan was the last to go before me, looking back before gesturing for me to follow. Try to keep up. With his final advice, I watched as he shifted as easily as breathing into a large domineering wolf with coat of silver and black. It had been a while since I'd seen Roman in such a form, but even knowing that he must be even larger, it was hard to remember when seeing Logan like this. I tried not to let them intimidate me, reaching to my waist to clutch my knife reassuringly before stepping into the trees as well. I paced myself, racing behind the wolves quick enough to not lose them entirely, but slow enough to not overexert myself. The weather was finally beginning to warm as spring approached. Animals which normally would be hiding out among the snow were now finding the courage to wander outside of their homes, so I suspected the game collection wouldn't be too bad after this hunt. I was used to my type of hunt. As it wasn't allowed beyond a certain point, many humans focused more on growing crop than the less dependable option of meat. So I didn't usually have anyone with me in my own hunts. The wolves hunted as several members, but in the end it was more like they were one. They would use tactics to draw out prey, even if it meant not getting the kill for themselves. They also traveled as far as they wanted, without any concerns of potential attacks or other dangers. I enjoyed the feel of it, the freedom of racing through the trees, pausing to inspect tracks, before searching for whatever beast waited among the forest. At some point, I felt entirely immersed in the hunt, focused on putting in effort to prove myself useful to the group. I landed swiftly behind a sheltered bush area, pausing when hearing the shuffling of greenery not too far off in the distance. I reached for my shoulder, pausing when realizing I didn't have my bow this time around. Instead, I lowered my hand and grasped the blade at my hip, pulling it from its sheath carefully, as I moved slowly towards the noise. I breathed ever so slowly, afraid any false sound would scare off the potential game. However, with a short step, my presence was made known with a small snap of a twig. I tensed, expecting the creature to run the opposite direction. Instead, I started with surprise when the beast let out a horrific screech and began to charge at me. A beast I had never seen before burst from its shelter, short but large and fitted with long tusks along its opened mouth, as it came at me. I leapt to the side, dropping my blade like an amateur, and cursed myself. The beast didn't run away after passing me. In fact, It turned to charge at me again, fully intent on injuring and killing me itself if necessary. I grasped for my blade once, twice, panic setting in. Normally, I would have just used my gift to halt the beast, but for some reason my thoughts went blank at such an unfamiliar creature. I felt in danger, but also I felt it was still my prey. I focused on my right hand, calling my own beast within me until I felt my hand twist and shift into something more dangerous than a blade. Just as the beast would ram into me, I swiped at its face, sending it reeling into the ground with a loud cry. Deep gashes remained across its flesh in response, leaving it panting with its injury painfully. I paused, standing straight and feeling my hand already receding into that of a human's. Then I lowered myself and grabbed the blade that had evaded me before, moving to finish off the beast so that it wouldn't suffer any longer. I hadn't even noticed the wolves were far ahead of me at this point. Just a look around showed none were nearby, having continued their hunt without me. I looked from the distance to the beast with a sigh, knowing this meant I would have to drag the creature's body back to the village myself. I didn't have rope on me, but after inspecting the body, I suspected I could possibly sling it over my shoulders with great difficulty if anything. It would leave me messy, but I had already learned to expect such a thing by now. As I bent over my game, determining the best way to lift its rather heavy form from the ground, I felt a twinge of something from within me, like a quiet alarm. I lifted my head slowly, looking around me without moving. A shapeshifter was coming towards me. I could sense it, but it wasn't someone I was familiar with. I figured it was someone in the hunt, so I didn't think much of it. I continued to work with the beast on the ground before me, ripping at my shirt to use the fabric to bind its feet together. Before I could finish, the faint alarm suddenly got louder, forcing me onto my feet before I even knew what I was doing. I turned to see a fully shifted wolf lunge from the trees towards me, teeth bared dangerously, and claws extended towards me. I felt numb all at once. The wolf was too close already. I had no way to defend myself. I opened my mouth to breathe in sharply, but before I could make a sound, another wolf slammed into the one attacking me. I stepped back, stumbling over my game and falling onto the ground roughly. I recognized Logan immediately, as he towered over the offending wolf dangerously, a growl tearing through his throat terribly. The wolf in his grip shifted abruptly to the human form of who I then recognized to be Vio. He held his hands out in surrender, baring his neck and trembling before Logan. Without hesitating, Logan shifted into his human form as well, holding a foot firmly on Vio's chest to prevent him from getting up. I noticed his hands remained partially shifted into that of dangerous claws, flexing threatening above his victim. "You dare attack the King Alpha's mate?" Logan asked the man coldly. "I won't accept some half-human as one of us. She should have died on the wolf moon," Vio spat despite his trembling form, and anger radiating through him as he glared past Logan to me. "You seriously are willing to submit to that?" Logan held his pose over Vio, his features guarded and his body tense, as though in preparation for something horrible. I pushed myself from the ground, my heart pounding in my throat with fear. "Logan," I began to try to stop him from doing anything destructive, but before I could he abruptly swiped at Vio. I screamed sharply, before covering my mouth just as quickly. Logan swiped at the man again, ignoring his violent spasms, before savagely shoving his claws into Vio's chest. He just as brutally pulled a chunk of meat from it and tossed it to the ground. I stared in horror, a wave of illness washing over me, despite the fact that Vio would have left me in a similar state if Logan hadn't stopped him. I stood speechless and frozen as Logan turned to stalk towards me, blood on his hands and across his chest. I took a step back despite myself, but he only bent forward to grab the beast I had slain only moments before and flung it over his shoulder. "You did good," he said gruffly before beginning to head back towards the direction of the village. I stared at his form as he walked away determinedly. He didn't seem too bothered by what he'd just done. I knew that Logan was still a stranger to me, and I knew he was a warrior wolf. But for some reason I hadn't really taken the time to think about what he was truly capable of. He paused when I didn't follow, turning to gesture ahead of him. "Let's go." I threw a last glance at Vio's blooded and lifeless body, knowing full well that could have been me instead. Then I took a deep breath, closing my hands into fists, and turned to follow Logan as requested. Don't miss Mila's next hunting moment. Subscribe to stay updated.